in Ragam Sindhu Bhairavi, and it's Rag Bhairavi in Hindustani. So it goes like this. Vishveshwar darshan karo chalaman tum kashi. Vishveshwar darshan karo chalaman tum kashi. The essence of classical music, whether it's Hindustani or Carnatic, still remains. The underpinnings are very strongly spiritual. When I mean spiritual, I mean connection with the inner self, a sense of being centered, being connected with your emotional states, being aligned with times of day, being aligned with nature, with seasons. So, this is what is so strongly spiritual about Indian classical music, which is very unique to our music. And in this lies its potential to heal, to soothe, to emotionally, to allow you to release and to have a sense of catharsis, to transform your emotions. In this lies its ability. The fact that it's so organic, it comes from the sounds of nature, it is aligned to times of day, there is so much devotional underpinnings. Even in Carnatic music, irrespective of the gods and goddesses that were mentioned in the song, which is a thing apart, the spirit was one of salvation and submission to something larger than oneself. Welcome all of you to this. My tryst with music began long time ago as a child in a typical sort of Tamilian Brahmin households. Typically have this thing of all children should start learning Carnatic music. All children should start doing Bharatanatyam as soon as they can walk and talk. So it was sort of it's a very organic kind of thing that happens in South Indian families. So I was no different. I was brought up in a typical kind of household where music was all around me. Incidentally, my mother, who's also she's part of the audience. Welcome, Geeta ji. Her mama is her uncle, maternal uncle, is Guruji A.S. Raghavan. I don't know if any of the Tamilians in this group may have heard of him. So he's an exponent of Tirupugar, and which is Tamil poetry, Tamil devotional poetry, and he set music for about 500, 600 Tamil poems. So we come from a musical, to cut a long story short, we come from a musically inclined family. Everybody sings, everybody plays the mridangam, everybody has connect with, light classical and classical music. So I was born in a household like that, and my mother also sings. The earliest memory, if Geeta ji can corroborate, of me with music is, I was. It was a typical Chennai summer evening, and it was really warm and sultry. And in my house in Chennai, which was on the second floor, we had a little balcony, and there was this little netted sofa which we had put in the balcony. And I think the electricity had gone. We had frequent power cuts. So my mother was there. I must have been about 5 or 6 years old. I don't remember, maybe around that. So she had put me on her lap, and she was humming something. And I don't think she knew I could sing till then. She was kind of, I was sitting on her lap, and we were trying to wait for the electricity to come back. And she was singing this song in Ragam Sindhu Bhairavi, and it's Rag Bhairavi in Hindustani. So it goes like this. Vishveshwar darshan karo chalaman tum kashi. Vishveshwar darshan karo chalaman tum kashi. She was singing this. So I was sitting on her lap, and I don't think she expected me to repeat it, but I kept kind of humming along. And she said, she still calls me Nitu at home. So, Nitu, can you repeat that, please? And I said, in my little baby voice, I tried to kind of repeat what she was singing. And she said, can you do that again? And with every time I repeated, she was getting more and more excited. I was wondering what was happening. Why is she getting so excited? She said, we'll have to find your music teacher. You're able to repeat what I'm singing. I think you can actually, you can actually pick up music. And before I knew it, I was in this whirlpool of gurus and competitions, and I was incidentally also in a school which encouraged music and dance immensely. So Padma Seshadri in Chennai continues to be a very pro fine arts kind of ethos, academic ethos. So before I knew it, within the next 5 to 10 years, I was just singing in competitions. I was being pushed to do a lot of music related. Initially, it was quite with a lot of reluctance, as she may she may testify, because I was like, "Theek hai, I can sing, but I'm more interested in going down and playing, with that neighbor's kid, and I gilli danda or climbing trees or whatever." But somehow, it was imperative that music should be a part of my life. So that's how music began, and that particular anecdote is something I really, narrate often, because it's so distinct in my mind, that particular point from where music began. So yeah, then it was just a lot of exposure to music, classical music. My first guru, I remember, was singer to Dansyus, Padma Subramaniam, who's a famous Bharatanatyam classical dancer. So she used to sing for her, and Mrs. Vijaya Natarajan was her name. She was my first guru. And I still remember very fondly those days when she used to climb up, despite her age and health problems. She would climb up 2 floors with a lot of effort to come and teach me classical music. And some of the basic Carnatic pieces that I have learned, I still remember in the way she has taught me. So there began my tryst with music. And I went on, grew up completely in that school. I didn't, funnily, my parents didn't move cities. So I had the advantage of studying in the same school for 14 years. And, somehow there is an advantage to that also. While there are advantages to moving cities and moving schools, there's a very different advantage to being in the same school for 14 years. Your teachers always know you. They see you grow as a musician, as a student, as a person. And, there's so much of, let's say, a community kind of feel when you're in the same school. So through my school years, there was so much of lovely exposure to lovely stuff to do with music. And we used to, in fact, as part of our prayers, recite the Bhagavad Gita every morning. It was sort of like our ritual every morning to do that. And life went on, and music kept becoming a bigger and bigger part of my life. Inter-school competitions, then state level competitions, then national level competitions. So there was a lot of impetus around that. In fact, I still remember when one of the competitions that the school sent me for, we represented the state level at the national level, and there was this particular song that I particularly remember in what we call Lalit Rag in Hindustani classical music, and kind of closer to the Shubha Panturali scale in Carnatic music. I'm just going to change to Madhyam. तू है मेरा प्रेम देवता, तू है मेरा प्रेम देवता, मन की प्यास बुझाने आए, मन की प्यास बुझाने आए, तेरे चरण की दासी हूँ मैं, तेरे चरण की दासी हूँ मैं, तू है मेरा प्रेम देवता, तू है मेरा प्रेम देवता. So I remember singing this for the finals, in Delhi, and then began a growing realization of the connect between classical music and film songs. So our Bollywood culture from very far back has actually used classical ragas as the base for so many of these evergreen things that we still listen to. I don't know if any of you, any of you name some of your favorite Hindi songs from an old Hindi? We'll start with Rahul ji. Anything that you particularly like?
That's hard. Okay. Immediately what comes to my mind is S.D. Burman and maybe Nadiya Chale Chale Re Dhara.
Okay. I might have heard it. I'm wondering
Okay.
whether you've heard some of these very, big blockbuster hits like Kabhi Kabhi Mere Dil Mein Khayal Aata Hai,
Yes.
In Aankhon Ki Masti Mein, and Mausam Hai Ashikana, and all of these, Pakiza, Mughal Azam. So, even if I were to take this Kabhi Kabhi Mere Dil Mein Khayal Aata Hai, कभी कभी मेरे दिल में ख्याल आता है, कभी कभी मेरे दिल में ख्याल आता है कि जैसे तुझको बनाया गया है मेरे लिए, तू अब से पहले सितारों में बस रही थी कहीं, तुझे जमीन पे बुलाया गया है मेरे लिए. It's a classic, big time hit, you know. Man Tarpat Haridarishna. I think I've heard that also. Just trying to remember the tune so that we can categorize the rag. I think it's that. Anyway, so we come back to Kabhi Kabhi. This is based on a very grand rag called Yaman, and which is from the Kalyan scale. You know, it's, and you can find tons of Bollywood songs which are based out of based on Indian classical ragas, which are evergreen for that very reason. So Indian classical music has contributed immensely to the longevity of Bollywood songs from those years. And so we just go on and on. And as I grew up and as I took part in these little competitions and little events and all that, there was an opportunity to curate these Hindi and Tamil songs which are classical raga based. For the Tamil audience here, I don't know if some of these Ilayaraja hits are amazing examples of this. I'm trying to remember one in Ragam Chalanatai. Okay, when it comes back to my mind, I will sing it. So Ilayaraja, இளைய நிலா பொழிகிறது தரரரரரா, that's there in Neela Nili Ambarpe. Na 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 இளைய நிலா. So this is a mishmash of Bilawal, which is the Shankarabanam scale, and a little bit of Komal notes added in the middle. So this is another beautiful example. But anyway, this is just a peppering of so many, a big repertoire of Hindi classical music, which has come into, Hindi film songs that has come into popular culture, which are based on classical ragas. So now, life just went on, college years, and went on to start working. Somehow, I never took up music till very late. But through those years, there has been amazing, kind of indications, let's say divine indications from above, that music is something that needs to be a part of my life for reasons more than just its aesthetic appeal. Some of these anecdotes I will share with you. One of it was very long back. One of the concerts that I was performing, there was this particular rag, which is, again, the Todi scale. And there was a Carnatic piece in that. Shri Satyanarayanam Upasvaye Nityam Shri Satyanarayanam. So I sang this. I don't know how much of it was my rendering itself and how much of it was the power of the rag, which I would attribute a lot to the latter. That there was a lady in the audience. I must have been, I think, 17 or 18 years old. And the lady in the audience walked up to me after the concert and she said something about this rag and the way the song is somehow lifted weight off my heart. And she was talking about something that some maybe sorrow or some thing she was holding in her heart, which was heavy, and for some reason which remained unresolved for many years. So I didn't understand the import of that event till today. Until today, when I look back and say that was quite a profound thing that music did, right? It could have been anybody performing. I don't think it was so much to do with the person who was performing, but it was more to do with the raga and the power that it had over the audience. Now, this instance comes back to my mind now because I have progressively seen the connection between classical music and spirituality, and therefore its ability to soothe and heal the spirit, and therefore your mind and your body. And this has been a growing realization over, say, a couple of decades, I would say. that this particular instance was again the beginning of that realization that music has that potential to heal. And then, of course, like I said, my life journey went on. I went on to pursue a career in advertising and in photography, which was far removed from music. Even though music was very much alive in my life, I was doing my concerts and I was performing, I was learning, but I never really thought of taking it up full time. So as time progressed, little such things kept happening. You know, this instance that I spoke about, more such things happened. So this was another instance that happened about maybe about 10 years ago, and at a time when I decided I should start teaching music, because along with my main profession, there was an interest to teach, because a lot of people came to me saying they wanted to learn. So there was this particular child. There were three instances I'm going to talk about. They're so beautiful that testify how music can be used, actively for becoming more spiritually centered. So the first of this was a child who was 4 years old. So her mother came to me saying, "Listen, we heard you sing, and I know you're pursuing another profession, but could you kind of teach my child?" So I said, "Doesn't matter." The child was just 4.5 years old. But the mother said, "I have a big problem. She doesn't sit still. She doesn't want to sit still or learn music, but I have a feeling she has an interest in music because she hums and, kind of sways her head to music that is being played." I said, "Doesn't matter. We'll give it a shot." So the child started coming to me, and I made absolutely no headway with her for the first 6 classes. I would try and make her sit with the harmonium, with the Shruti box, and she would want to say, "Auntie, give me a paper to do art." I said, "Okay, take the paper, but will you please sing?" She says, "No, no, I want only color." So actually, within 6 sessions, my house is filled with colors and papers rather than musical notes. Every time the child would come, I would start trying to teach her music, and she would only be doing art. Then, after 6 sessions, I said, "See, this is not fair. I can't take fees for teaching a child art." So I called the mother up and I picked up the phone to tell her that, "Listen, I don't think it's a wise idea to send your child because she's not wanting to learn." But the moment I picked up the phone and started talking, she cut me off. She said, "Nitya, thank you." I said, "For what exactly?" So she said, "Not only is my child drawing better, but she's humming music." I said, "What music is she humming?" Incidentally, in those 6 sessions, because she was not actively learning, I had switched on Rag Hansadwani on my tape recorder saying that kuch to ghuse, kuch to ghuse. So I had put one shloka in Rag Hansadwani, तो वो बज रहा था 6 class while I was sitting and doodling and coloring with her. So the lady called, before I can kind of with a lot of sorrow say, "Listen, I don't think we have made headway with music." She said, "No, forget about it. She's doing very well. I want to double the number of classes." I said, "I'm not doing anything." She said, "I don't know what you're not doing or doing, but something is working." She's singing, and she's singing something which sounds like this, and she sang it, and it was Rag Hansadwani. Array, I said, "But I didn't teach her. I just had it play all along." She said, "I don't know. Somewhere the environment of art and music disarmed that child. And she, like a sponge, while she was drawing, the music was going into her." And another thing the mother said was, she stopped fidgeting. She's become a much more calm child. She focuses better in class. All this is directly correlated to the fact that she started learning music. I said, "Arey, ye to kamal ho gayi. This is, something I didn't go in to do. I went in to teach music, but I got completely something else." And this was the very first testament, apart from that first thing that I said, actively in the last 10 years, that I said, "Oh, wow, music has potential more than just an aesthetic one." And this can be nothing truer than a child's testimony. When a child responds, and when a child reacts to music, that's usually very authentic, because they don't have layers of judgment or conditioning. So that was the first thing. I said, "Wow, we're sitting on a treasure." And I said, "Wow, it can actually calm a child. It can make her more creative. It can make her more fond of art." And her drawings improved. So that was another byproduct, apart from, music itself, which she started singing and humming, her art became better. And somewhere I think that right brain opened up, and she started becoming much more proficient in the arts. So that was the first thing. And then later, as my teaching practice and as my performance practiced, as my performances kept growing, and I started growing to realize that music should be a bigger and bigger part of my life, more things like these started happening. The second instance was this lady who was taking classes with me, who was learning, I think, Rag Megh. I think she was learning Rag Megh or Malhar, one of these two. Rag Megh, I think. Hmm, कहाँ से आए बदनाम कजरा ना जाए कहाँ से आए बदनाम. So this is sort of close to Madhmat Sarang Megh. So they are a family of rags which are very similar. So she was doing Rag Megh, and the lady was going through a pretty tough personal patch. So she was having some marital issues. They had probably filed for a divorce, and there was some upheaval emotionally. And she had taken to smoking, chain smoking, as a sort of like a release for her emotional, upheaval. We all knew that that was not a good thing for her health, because she also had a lot of other health complications. So I remember telling her quite often that I think you should quit smoking. It's not a great thing to do. You're just abusing your system. Anyway, she says, I kept trying, Nitya ji, I don't think I can do it. And that's it. This is it. But she kept coming and learning Rag Megh, and it kept happening, kept happening. And one fine day she came and told me, I don't know what, from yesterday, I don't feel the need to smoke. I said, okay, that's a good thing. Did you kind of consciously decide? She said, no. Yes, I did consciously decide, in the sense I've been meaning to quit for a long time, but it quite didn't quite really happen, because it was sort of like a urge, right? There's a stress, there's emotional upheaval, and then there's something that can, quasi make it feel better. So that's what she was doing. So the smoking was kind of making her feel, I don't know, maybe it was a stress release, it was some sort of a support. And somewhere, as music kept creeping into her life, some part of that need somehow was being met by music, is what my surmise is now. Because she said, definitely it is to do with music, because I've been sitting for my riyaz, I've been doing Rag Megh. And in the process of doing Rag Megh, I got so involved that somehow I didn't reach for that extra carton of cigarettes. Somehow it has gone down from 2 to 1 carton a day, or whatever. She was doing 3 or 4 cartons, and it's come down by half. So clearly, if you look at it, that half carton was replaced by music. Na? Half of that quota of cigarettes was replaced by music in some way. And she says, I don't feel, I feel satiated when I listen to music and sing. There is an emotional satiation, and that makes me feel full. So I don't feel the need for something external to kind of make me feel supported. And this is something very nebulous, she said, but it was so profound. And of course, she did give it up for 6 months, and somehow the music classes also didn't happen after that. She got busy with her work, and she did resume smoking after that. But even for those 6 months, if music could kind of help her get off smoking, I thought that, wow, I mean, this is this is something, we're sitting on a treasure that we are probably not actively using enough. So this was the second thing. The third thing actually happened literally in half an hour. There was this lady who was again listening to Rag Malhar. This was during one of my concerts. So Rag Malhar goes something like this. I don't know if you've heard this very famous song from Goody. बोले रे पपी हरा बोले रे पपी हरा नित मन तर से नित मन प्यासा नित मन प्यासा नित मन तरसे बोले रे पपी हरा बोले रे पपी हरा बोले रे पपी बोले रे पपी हरा. तो ये राग मल्हार के ऊपर है. तो मल्हार गाते वक्त एक लेडी ने बोला कि अभी ये this was in a concert setting, so I obviously didn't have personal interaction with the person. So Rag Malhar was a big part of what I sang. And then as usual, what happens is when artists get off stage, there's usually a little bit of interaction with the audience. They walk up to you, they say, "Oh, that particular piece we really enjoyed. Oh, I remember this from my childhood when I heard this," or whatever. So this lady had walked up to me saying that I came into the concert, first of all, very reluctantly because somebody else dragged me. And two is I had a splitting headache. She had a migraine and it was pretty bad when she came into the concert. And she said, I don't know, after that Rag Malhar, somehow my my headache vanished. I said, really? She said, yeah, it was distinctly after Rag Malhar. Something happened. Of course, there were other rags that were performed, but Rag Malhar ke baad, pata nahi kya ho gaya. And she says, I'm 100% sure it has got to do with something to do with this rag because there was something very calming about it, and somehow my migraine vanished. So this was another profound, testimonial for the healing powers of music. So it's no wonder that all this is because if you actually go back to the historical roots of classical music, it comes from the Samved, and the Samved itself is supposed to come from the primordial sound of creation. That's what it's believed that the primordial sound of creation is what gave birth to the seven notes. And there's another theory that the seven notes came from sounds of birds and animals. So whichever way you look at it, the roots are organic, the roots are spiritual. So it's no wonder that such an organic evolution of musical notes and melodic structures should have therapeutic and emotionally positive impact on people. It's no surprise. Um, Now, of course, if you look at the way it has evolved, classical music has evolved. It has moved from being one singular form of music to a bifurcation that happened around the 15th, 16th century with the Arabic and Persian influence, that we moved to do two forms of music. There's Carnatic music, which is south of the Vindhyas, and the Hindustani classical music, which went to the darbars or the courts in the north. While music in the south still remained in the confines of temples. Anuradha, you must have come across the instances where you must have seen or found historical evidence of concerts that happen in temples, especially in South Indian temples. So temples were houses of, yes, Anuradha, love to hear your.
Kacheris, are you referring to?
Yes, I'm referring
Yes.
to kacheris. I don't want to say kacheris because I don't know how many of you will understand the word. Kacheri is concert. It's a parlance in the south that we use. So temples were seats for a lot of kacheris, lot of concerts, Carnatic concerts. Because
I just want to add a little bit. We are like a day away from Holi, and at this point in time, if you go to Braj, every temple will be singing music and
Yes.
very traditional music.
Yes.
It's now called Haveli Sangeet, but because
Yes.
the temples there are called Havelis, they are the homes
Absolute.
of God, not really
Wow.
temples. So if you go around this time, a month before Holi, every temple you'll see music being sung, and there are traditional songs that are sung.
Yes, actually, that's so true, Anuradha. Temples have been seats of culture, even in India, even otherwise, even in the north. They've been seats of culture, music, dance included, and it's beautiful because somewhere devotion, spirituality has gotten connected with music in this premise. And no, going back to that particular point where the bifurcation happened, the essence of classical music, whether it's Hindustani or Carnatic, still remains. The underpinnings are very strongly spiritual. When I mean spiritual, I mean connection with the inner self, a sense of being centered, being connected with your emotional states, being aligned with times of day, being aligned with nature, with seasons. So, this is what is so strongly spiritual about Indian classical music, which is very unique to our music. And in this lies its potential to heal, to soothe, to emotionally, to allow you to release and to have a sense of catharsis, to transform your emotions. In this lies its ability. The fact that it's so organic, it comes from the sounds of nature, it is aligned to times of day, there is so much devotional underpinnings. Even in Carnatic music, irrespective of the gods and goddesses that were mentioned in the song, which is a thing apart, the spirit was one of salvation and submission to something larger than oneself. So this is how I think music has always remained alive through our popular culture because of the ragas that were used, in classical in film songs, and the ragas having spiritual underpinnings is why they remain evergreen today. You know, the emotional connect with these all of these film songs remain evergreen today, despite so much of, even if you look at the very recent some of the recent numbers by, I like Sanjay Leela Bansali for this reason. He has kept classical music alive in his a lot of his movies. You have this from Padmavat. घूमर रमवारे आप पधारो सा, राग वृंदावनी सारंग. एक्चुअली सारंग का बेस है, लेकिन उसमें मेघ और मल्हार का भी थोड़ा. I can't read this question. Ramakrishnan ji, if you could post the question verbally, that would be lovely once I'm done with this part. Would love to answer it if I can. It's based on Rag Vrindavani Sarang, and a little bit of Megh and Mia Malhar also comes in and out. But Ghumar song is something even youngsters, Rutuja, you'll relate to it. I'm sure you know a lot of your friends who dance to Ghumar and who feel connected with this, with this song. But they have no clue that it's based on three major classical music ragas, right? But it is so attractive, and it is based on Tal Keherwa, Dhagima, Tinnak Din, Dhagima, Tinnak Din, Ghumare, 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 Ghumere, Ghumare, 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 Vaisa, Ghumare, Ghumere. See, all of this is going to Tal Keherwa and to Rag Vrindavani Sarang. But most people didn't even realize, but they were swaying and clapping to it without knowing that. So that is one amazing, another example of how classical music is penetrative and very relatable if it is packaged in a way which is easy for today's generation to relate to. Now, if we can get classical music to be accessible through, so this is where my role comes in and what I'm passionate about comes in. So about 6-8 years ago, I started this, in a little very small way, this venture called Music Vruksh. Now, the idea behind Music Vruksh was to move away from just performing music for its aesthetic purpose, which is itself, of course, a very good, reason in itself to sing music, but to expand its use beyond aesthetics to making it relatable to the average person. So there's a shrouding of inaccessibility that Indian classical music has for the lay person, because they think that it is too esoteric, it's too fuddy-duddy. Some of the youngsters say, oh, it's not cool. It's not cool, You package it, ye moh moh ke dhage. Oh, very nice, very nice. Oh, latest song, this, that. Yaman rag hai, bhai. Thoda Yaman hai, Puriya Dhanashri hai, sab hai usme. You want it packaged in a way which is cool, but actually the aesthetics remain the same. So, if classical music can be made relevant to people and put in context of their lives, whether it is through the context of health, whether it's the context of aesthetics, or whether it's the context of just knowledge or desire to learn, or whether it is something to do with just developing your lung power. So, basically find different contexts in which you can place classical music so that it is consumable by the average person. So another anecdote. So another concerts, what happened was, it was a sort of like an interactive concert session where we had a bunch of ragas. I had Bollywood songs and followed by classical music, and there was an appreciation session with the audiences. Now, this was a proper, like a venue with a proper stage, and there was an audience of 200, 300 people, and we were interacting. But there was also a sort of like a perimeter which was cordoned off, and we had security people positioned at those posts because we didn't want kind of intrusion into another event that was happening. I think of a distance away. I remember while I was interacting with the audience, I was noticing on the side, I mean, the stage was here on the side, there was a security person standing there. And he was, he was actually peeping and trying to listen to the music. And I realized that it was not a passing interest. He was very actively interested, but he could not understand it. You see, there was ragas being discussed, there was something being discussed and sung, he was very attracted to the musical part, but he was desperate to understand more, but he felt somewhere that maybe he needed to have training or whatever. So I remember walking up to him and said, भैया आपको आप ऐसे सुन रहे थे कुछ कुछ चाहिए नहीं मेम साहब वो जो आपने वो जो पर्टिकुलर राग कुछ तो आप बोल रहे थे राग या कुछ बोल रहे थे लेकिन वो मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा लेकिन दिल को छुआ लेकिन मुझे वो समझ में नहीं आया लेकिन मुझे इच्छा है समझने को ज्यादा लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि ये ज्यादा मेरी बस की बात ही नहीं है क्योंकि ये शायद कुछ सीखना पड़ेगा इसके लिए. It was amazing to see music penetrate him, and it just told me more and more with absolutely no doubt that music is for everybody. Classical music is for everybody. It's not something out there which is sit on a pedestal and only learn it. You'll have to do 20 years of training. Aisa nahi. And so, yeah, coming back to this, so Music Flux is about this, basically making classical music accessible to every person because it has so much potential. It would be a sad thing to see it go waste. It has to be used in whatever capacity. If you can't sing, you can hear. If you can't hear, you can play. If you can't play, you can learn the tabla. But in whatever way you can engage with classical music, you will always only go away richer in terms of your mental, physical, emotional equilibrium and in terms of just appreciating one more thing that is beautiful. So this is really the crux of all these. I have lot of other anecdotes that I would love to share if I had more time, but all of them basically just point to the intrinsic relatability of classical music as a potentially spiritual and therefore healing form of music, and especially in the context of COVID, very, very important. So what has happened in the last 1 year is, I'll take a couple of more minutes before we open up for Q&A, is that we have held these workshops, on music and wellness, because a lot of people are isolated. They're facing emotional challenges. They have depression, anxiety, stress. They've lost their jobs. There are career challenges, there are domestic challenges. There are dynamics, family dynamics that are dealing with just being 24 hours with a spouse or with a child or with a parent. It's so unusual, right? It's such an unusual environment. It's thrown up a lot of mental and psychological challenges. And I encountered a lot of that in the workshops that I was doing. And we concluded a couple of them just recently, where, a lot of people came to me with this thing of, we are isolated, we are depressed, we are anxious, and we are hoping that music can do something. And it's amazing that classical music, if you package it in a way which is easy for them to understand, break it down, make it easy, don't make it this esoteric mumbo jumbo thing, they have amazing receptivity to it. And many of them went away with glorious testimonials for classical music as a therapeutic medium. Many of them had sleep issues vanished. Many of them had, hormonal stuff, menopausal stuff. They got better. A gentleman who had anxiety and, who was on medication for 15 years, he felt relief just by engaging in these ragas. So we taught them a mix of things to play some ragas. Those who wanted to play could play. Those who wanted to sing could sing. Those who just wanted to understand it intellectually they took over wellness in different ways from the same music. Some people got better sleep, some people got better physiology, some people were less anxious, some people were saying, I'm fighting less with my husband or with my wife. So there are wellness, and there was a fifth person who said, suddenly my lungs are performing better because she commenced singing and she says, actually, my lungs are doing a lot better. So wellness has come up in ways that even I didn't predict. I went in knowing instinctively that classical music has potential for wellness. I knew instinctively that there is a spiritual connect, but in what forms it will flower as wellness in each person was a surprise to me. And it was like a treasure. Every time I did a workshop, every time people spoke to me about what it did to them, each time I was just bowled over by the new ways in which wellness was found by these people through music. So this is what I'm here to endorse, that COVID has actually, the isolation has been a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it has thrown up challenges, but on the other hand, it has made us look inward, forced us to find our moorings, forced us to find our philosophical and spiritual moorings. And music can be a great way for that to begin. And that journey can go on even after the lockdown opens, even after COVID goes away. You can take with you that part of you which is spiritual and centered, and music can be a way to do that. So that's what was the crux of what I wanted to say.
What is the relationship between the Tamil Pan and the Sanskrit Raga? And would you be able to illustrate with an example?
I wouldn't be able to do that because Tamil Pan is not something I'm familiar with. But for Raga, I can speak at length about. So basically, Raga is a melodic structure. So when we go back to the Vedic times, we had just 3 notes. If you look at the Gayatri Mantra also, Yom Bhu Da Na 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 Na. So there were just 3 swars, and from the 3 swars came 7 swars, and through the process of Grama Murchana, you had the evolution of ragas or the melodic structures as we know them as today. Melakartas or parent scales is what were first formed, and ragas came from there. So melodic structures, I wouldn't know about Tamil Pan, so I would love to go back and read up about it. But I do know that ragas this is the way ragas have evolved, and ragas form the basis for melody improvisation in both forms of classical music, Carnatic and Hindustani, irrespective of the lyrical or the let's say the style content or the lyrical content is independent of raga, which forms the melodic structure, irrespective of which form of classical music we sing. But yes, sometime I would want to come back and try and answer that when I do my own little research, Ramakrishnan.
You have articulated certain things very well to my understanding. And whenever we talk music, we always are a little tongue-tied because we're talking about something which is of practice and of experience, and we are trying to give and put words. And that's why critics use very, very fanciful words to say something very ordinary also. Anyway, I know it as a science that music is the only activity whereby the whole brain is engaged.
Correct.
It is very well known that whenever we are doing any activity like running or problem solving or even watching a movie, usually one part of the brain or at max 2 portions of the brain are activated and rest
Correct.
is peacefully unaware and at rest. Perhaps that's its way of coping. But music is the only activity in which the whole brain, and it's been done through scientific studies like PET scan and so on and so forth. It's very well known. Then second is the way Indian music has evolved. It is multi-threaded. It is connected to spirituality. It is connected to the time of the day. It is connected, which means your circadian rhythm comes into picture.
True.
Then it is connected to
Nature.
the lunar time, which is which paksha, etc., and it is connected to solar time, which is what kind of season is there. So
Right.
it's very multi-threaded, and I am again through my studies aware that like you mentioned very clearly that there was probably a case of ADHD, attention deficit kind of hyperactive child, and we know in USA almost 50-60% children are treated in one way or other for ADHD.
Right.
And possibly it is linked to so many things. But I would not talk about all that. I'll say lack of music is the crux of those activities. So you're watching too much of your mobile or TV or any other thing, maybe some of it can come back, and then people can get involved. So have you applied your the mind to like you have obviously applied it in a practical way, but I'm talking from the academic pedagogical sense that have you done any research about specific ragas to specific problem or that sort of a thing? I'm aware, for instance, that Baroque music or the kind of slow rhythm which Baroque music
Right.
has been known, and some of the Indian Vilambit, I believe, the
Yes.
slow ones, are linked to better learning. You gave one
Right.
example of Malhar and headache. Of course, that is a very too pat to be, but anecdotally, we do understand that there is a possibility of specific such links. And
Correct.
definitely there is a link between Indian music and mental state a lot more.
Absolutely.
Again, there
Absolutely.
have been studies where on plants, people have applied music, and it was shown that when Indian music was played, Ravi Shankar ji's sitar was played to certain plants, their growth was maximum. And not only it was maximum, the plants was tilting towards the speaker. Go near it.
Right.
I'm aware of such study. So I wanted to ask you if you have tried to do more in that way or just on practical side of applying
Yes.
teaching and learning.
So I'd like to answer this in two parts. One is my personal role in this and how I apply music to wellness, and overall the trend that I see. Okay, so now in terms of correlating ragas to specific illnesses and specific parts of the body and specific, let's say, responses to specific ragas or melodic structures is something which is still undergoing intensive research. We still lack funding. We don't have as much funding as probably the US does, because it's a field with immense potential, and that is something that you instinctively know. But it's, you need to back it with enough scientific study and research. There's only one paper that I have come across which was done between as a study on ragas and impact on moods, and that was just a ragas and mood study. I think you can Google it. I fail to remember the name of the body that did the research, but it's a research paper which is on ragas and moods, and that's a properly that's a properly structured research that is out there. But in terms of ragas and ailments, it is still sort of, let's say, experimental work, and it is let's say, more testified truth rather than research backed therapy. So more like, if a person says over
I
a period of
understand what
time,
you're saying, that you have seen it empirically, but you have not done scientific measurements or instrumentation and that sort of a thing.
no.
I
So
appreciate that. It is our Indian way of doing things. Little bit of
it's sort of like alternate medicine is what I would call it, because a lot of alternate medicine that we follow are not necessarily always backed by science to tell you that, okay, this actually has effect.
empirical
But
proof. You take this, it cures it, and we are not worried about the physiology or biochemistry of it.
Exactly. No, it's almost like, see, another thing I would like to stress a little bit on, and this is something important, which I personally heavily endorse, which is basically intuitive truth, what I call intuitive truth. As you go deeper into meditative states, and it's been now 15, 18 years of, meditating every day. I know, there's a long, long way to go to even make a dent to your spiritual progress. But I'm saying, with whatever little experience I've had, there are things that come to you almost like, it's something that is unequivocal and clear to you. It is only waiting for science to vet it. I'm sure you've come across things in your life, in your journey.
No, what you are saying is that our method of arriving at to a conclusion can be a long drawn scientific one or an intuitive one of direct perception, etc. That is the Indian way in any case. Again,
not only necessarily Indian, I would want to say this is what I'm trying to stress on, is when you're on a spiritual path. And when I say spiritual path, when you're on a path which is committed to self-reflection and awareness, which is the quintessential Indian spirituality, way of approaching spirituality, which is meditative and awareness, and what Western science is now calling mindfulness, you will come across things that become evident to you because they're already there. It's almost like, that when you when the somewhere, Newton, when he saw the apple drop, he knows the apple is dropping. You just have to find the why of it, but it doesn't, just because you don't find the why, you don't know, it doesn't mean that the apple is not falling to the floor. So it is that. So when you're on a spiritual journey and a meditative journey, which is where I draw my let's say conviction from, when I say that music has enormous spiritual potential, enormous potential for healing, I'm coming from a space of intuitive truth that comes as a result of meditative practices, as a result of engaging in ragas, as a result of seeing people, seeing what effect it has had on you, have the same effect on people. So this is the kind of approach to the truth so there are different approaches to truth, right? There's a scientific approach, there is an intuitive and spiritual approach. So the approach that I'm drawing conviction from is a spiritual one, which throws open points of truth or revelation as you're on a journey. And it's just, the science just has to catch up and vet it. It is already there. It is already true. You just need science to catch up and vet it. So that is important. I agree, because when you're trying to propagate classical music as a healing method for the public who may not be on a spiritual path, who may not see this empirical truth, you will need to back it with science to say, listen, it's proven. You can believe me, which is why personally I don't do anything that relates ragas directly to illnesses, because I am a little circumspect of testifying something which is not scientifically proven, because that is not something that I would want to sell. What I can speak for firmly is what I have experienced in my personal journey and in my journey with all those people that I have taught and performed for, who are testifying to what has happened, and that I can say with conviction. So I would still restrict myself to that area of wellness rather than go into something that is not yet directly correlated or proven by science. That's how I would want to answer. We're going to get there very soon, though, because there is an increasing interest in classical music as a therapeutic medium, and there is NADA Center for Music Therapy, which has formed an association called Indian Music Therapy Association. So IMTA is doing a lot of research in this matter. There are different types of music therapists doing different kinds of work. Some people are specializing in dementia and Alzheimer's. Some people are specializing in children. Some people like me are specializing in overall holistic wellness for the average person who has lifestyle things, which I am more sort of interested in, and more I can sort of say with conviction and do with conviction. So there are different aspects of music therapy that are growing, and research is underway, and there is money also coming in slowly, and hopefully we'll get to a point where it will all be there and backed by science, and hopefully that will give us more impetus.
I was just commenting that in our tradition, there is this whole, in the Nyaya Shastra, there is this whole idea of pratyaksha praman, what is evident, so
Yes.
it doesn't have to be all this proofs which are by pushing science behind it, if you like, or the scientific way of defining truth. Just wanted to make that comment. This is about basically making a living out of classical music. Are there possibilities like that? Do people in the classical arts, both music, singing, or dance, Kathak and others, are they able to make money and have financial stability in their lives, independence? Is there enough endowments or whatever in India?
Okay, so it is a big challenge. There's no doubt about it. So if you're an artist, if you're a singer or a musician or a dancer, it is tough to make a living. There is no doubt about it. There's just such a talent surplus in our country. Every corner you have somebody who's enormously talented singer. I mean, you just switch on the TV. If you see Indian Idol, it kind of testament to this fact. If you look at raw musical talent, if not just classical, but just raw talent is just abundant in our country. So it is difficult. And earlier we had the darbars and we had the kings patronizing arts. So if you noticed, all these singers were usually attached to a king or to a court, or they had people patronizing them. We don't have that so much now. So it just purely as an artist, it is difficult to make a living, so to speak. But I would come back to something removed from music, and which I would say applies to any to approaching any form of career. That would be my 2 bits. Is that if you can find something unique you can add, whether it's music or whether it's science or whether it's engineering, if it's something unique you can add to what. Okay, fine, you're an engineer, but what is so unique about you compared to somebody else? This is a question every artist also has to ask himself or herself. Why should somebody come and listen to me? Why should somebody consume my music? What is it unique that I can give? So if you can carve a niche for yourself, and that carving niche should not be with an idea to make money. It should come from something innate, something which you're natural at, something which you're naturally drawn towards. For me, wellness and spirituality is something I was drawn towards. So it has become a career, it has become a profession, it has become my passion, my occupation, everything. I know of people who have taken up vocal coaching, just vocal coaching as their career. They are singers, they are actually classical musicians who have taken up vocal coaching as their career because they had an interest in the voice and how the voice works. They've gone through their travels while singing, they've lost their voice, they've had surgeries, so they feel that. So it's how you make your music your profession that will determine how viable financially it is. Just by being a good artist is honestly, purely practically, it's difficult to make a living. That's the truth of matters as it is today. But yes, if you can find your niche, and if you can see that unique stroke of your personal signature to your art, which you can offer, then there's no end. I mean, there's no end to what you can, how financially viable it can be as a career. I hope that answers your question.
So I just want to add to your answer to Rahul that in all creative fields, which includes writing, any kind of art, creative work, there is always a pyramid where people on the top make tons of money and
Yes.
rest of them struggle. The rest of them literally struggle. And Nityaji very rightly said that you have to be creative and innovative. You have to add something to it and not just practice what is existing already. So as long as you're creating, some money will definitely come your way, but it's only at the top that people make tons of money. There is no socialism in creativity.
Yeah.
So to say.
I do very, very endorse what Anuradha ji says. There has to be attention to who you are as a person. What is it? See, music, we are not robots producing music, right? If there are 10 different artists singing Rag Malhar, there is something new you're bringing to Rag Malhar, right? There is something new to the music you're giving to the world. It's layered with your personal experience, your travels, your life story, your interactions with people, your experiences with people, with music itself, with your own, like, spirituality in music is my story. It's my personal story. So while I am a classical musician, I am a singer, I can perform classical music of both genres. When I sing, I will obviously, it will be infused with my, let's say, my unique flavor of my tryst with spirituality, my tryst with people, my tryst with teaching, my tryst with wellness. It will be infused with that, and that's what would probably make it for me purely at a, let's say, at a very mundane worldly level. It'll become something which is commercially viable for me, even though I may not want to approach it like that. It may just become something eventual, that it becomes commercially viable. But for me to approach my profession, it has to be with the spirit of what is it that is me, that is in that what I offer. I think it's so important to discover the you in
before
your...
she unmutes me again. My question is that I have a problem of insomnia. Which rag should I listen? And I am insomniac not because I have any problem in life. I have no problems in life, but my mind is hyperactive. It's always thinking too much. I have too many ideas in my head, and I'm always thinking. So it's hyperactive mind, because of which I am insomniac. So what should I listen to?
So what you need to do, this is getting into very practical approach to using music. The first thing we recommend is sur riyaz. Now, as Indian classical musicians, we do what is known as sur riyaz. तानपुरा लेके सिर्फ सा लगाते हैं. आपने सुना होगा ना, सिर्फ तानपुरा को ट्यून करते हैं और सा लगाते हैं. सा जब लगाते हो, first of all, you are forced to be in the present. Your mind has to shut off from thoughts, from logic, from discussions, from debates. It has to come to the present as you try to align your voice and your ear to sa. Sa is that symbolic spiritual center of music. When you start with sa riyaz, and when you start listening to the tanpura sound, that itself will first of all calm your mind. That is number one. Two is usually chatter, brain chatter and mind chatter is usually a smoke screen. Usually, I don't know if it's the case with you. Maybe your inner exploration will give you the answer. But typically, I've seen with myself and with everybody I've interacted with in this wellness journey, mind chatter is usually a smoke screen for emotions you don't want to see within yourself. If there's a gamut of stuff which is unresolved, which you don't want to see, it is very easy for your intellect to crowd that and completely blur that with just chatter. So when you are forced to be in the present, you are forced to just let the emotions well up. And when emotions well up, sometimes those emotions are difficult to see or accept or process. There you can use a gamut of rags. And here I would not say one size fits all, because what Darbari is to somebody, for example, Jaunpuri is something I don't relate to at all. Jaunpuri rag, despite being a classical musician, I have memories of Jaunpuri which are not pleasant, because I grew up, when I was growing up, I remember I had very high fever one day and Jaunpuri was playing. From then on, I don't sing or play Jaunpuri because it's somehow associated with, a fever or a Horlicks or something which is you know. I mean, it's so let's say it's so subjective, but it is important for you to explore that subjectivity in your relation to music by exposing yourself to different ragas. So in this wellness workshop we did recently, I did a set of 6 or 8 ragas, and each person's way of relating to those ragas was just so different, but they took away very unique things from it. So what I would suggest to you, Anuradha ji, is first Sur ka Riyaz. Sur ka Riyaz, matlab, I mean, if you're aligned with a good guru or a music teacher, they will tell you how to do a Sur Riyaz. Sur Riyaz se chalu kijiye, and that will help your meditative state to come on. And then start exposing yourself to ragas, different ragas, and see how your emotions relate to them. As your emotions become more, let's say, they come out of the shell and you become more okay with seeing emotions, the brain chatter will come down, because brain chatter is usually a smoke screen for emotions which are unresolved. So that's what I would recommend.
What you said about unresolved issues, brain creating chatter, which is proverbial noise in communication, which kind of smothers the original message or original chain or original thought, etc. I definitely thought it is very important, because we have associated various levels of consciousness in musical or sound terminologies, where we have Pashyanti, Madhyama, Vaikhari, and then Brahmavak, Brahmavak being equivalent to the highest state of consciousness, etc. And that's why when I was making my point initially, I was relating it to various times of odd days and years and lunar and
Correct.
so on and so forth. This was yet another dimension to the same set of music rules which we have, which are embedded in Natya Shastra and other
Sangeet Ratnakara, all those historical texts.
there could be many other threads which I am not aware of and can't talk about actually.
Even I'm not aware of many threads. You know, the thing is, this is such a big ocean. You keep pulling out and you just keep discovering that there's so much more, so much more, so much more to discover. So,
only thing, sorry, I'll just finish my question, because I guess essentially what I wanted to, two things I wanted to say and then get your reaction also. One is that in India, we tend to lack confidence. If we have found empirical result, we are not bold and we are not ready to say, because there are 50 other distractors who will say, oh, he's trying to do something which is hanky panky, or he's trying to kind of bring Hinduism in it or religion into it, or he's a right wing or whatever, which kind of clouds things and makes us ultra conservative. So as far as I'm concerned, I have a feeling that you have done some work which has shown some result. Otherwise, you will not be continuing with that work. Any intelligent person won't. So to that extent, I would be very happy if you kind of make it available for people to read it. Everybody may not be able to appreciate music, but at least people will be able to read, learn,
right.
If let's say I'm 60-year-old, but if my daughter can learn, probably it can come in the next generation like that, So
right.
That was one takeaway which I wanted, and your reaction also to it. And the second was essentially related to how music will specifically help in spirituality.
Oh, yes.
We are starting with the soma part, but how to go to the psycho part.
Right. Okay. So I'll answer your
body to mind.
Two questions. Basically, one, you asked me, how do you convince people who don't believe in empirical truths and who believe in... Don't convince them. So the way to do it is, I feel, is to get them on the path to finding their own empirical truth. Do not use science. Do not use logic to reason with them. And there is, the thing is, this whole thing of I'm going to try and convince somebody is not the approach at all. And I don't like to use that approach even when I use music for wellness. What I do try and do is begin with where they are. Okay, let's start with where they are. If they are a human being, any part of the world, they have life problems, they have struggles, they have emotional upheavals, they have things in their personal life, professional life that are challenges. These are truths that whether you're right wing, left wing, whether you're intellectual or emotional, whether you're spiritual or not, these are truths. Human life brings with it all of these gamut of challenges. you begin with that. So when I, for example, when I've done my workshops, what I begin with where they are, their life story, and see where I can fit what I can give in their paradigm. Don't bring them to your paradigm. Fit what you can give into their paradigm and try and see how they can take whatever they can from it. So we had, for example, a research scientist in the panel of people who attended one of the workshops. She's an atheist and a skeptic, extremely atheist. She has no belief in any larger power, and she's a skeptic in terms of anything spiritual, anything. She came just to out of curiosity. So I mean, I wasn't out to prove to her that, guess what, I'm going to change your mind, that this exists, this spirituality exists. No, we begin with her. She narrated, when we discuss life stories of the participants, we see, irrespective of whether they're skeptical or cynical, or whether they're atheists or not, they bring forth their life struggles, right? So this lady had her health challenges, pretty large health challenges that she had just overcome, and she was struggling with some of those health issues, and she was also struggling with some self-confidence issues around music itself, because apparently some people around her kept telling her she doesn't know music. To me, that is a wellness goal that I can address. I don't need her to believe in spirituality, I don't need her to believe in music, but I can teach her music enough for her to feel good about herself. I can teach her enough music for her lungs to improve. I can teach her music enough for her to let her to be breathing in the present and not think of the past or the future. That she took away at the end of the workshop, and to me that is a goal well achieved. We don't need a full convert. We are trying to plug wellness in the context of that subjective individual who has their subjective issues. So that's how we approach this. Now, in terms of, so that's the first part of your question. Secondly, in terms of written material, there's ample amount of literature I've written on this topic. They're written with the same spirit of empirical truth that I keep speaking about. They're not written with the spirit of scientific inquiry. So it's important for a person who's reading that to not look for research findings in what I write. So I write for the Daily Guardian every fortnight. I write for the Score magazine every month, and I have written in different various publications. I don't know if there's a way, Rahul, we can probably pass on links to Abhitosh of the written work. But yeah, I would love to share the writings. But I do still personally very strongly advise experiencing music, because no amount of what you read, no amount of what you logic, no amount of what you discuss can actually replace the experience of indulging in music and being transformed by it. So that is the second part. And the third thing you asked me, very important, this is the biggest finding that I am here to share, is that what is spirituality? What is spirituality? You're getting closer in touch with yourself, being more aware of your emotional, mental, and physiological states, being less at their mercy, being more non-reactive, being able to transcend trappings of emotions and dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, internal dynamics, being able to transcend and being non-reactive. This is what essentially fundamentals of spirituality is. As you move forward and progress along that path, you get to higher states of awareness where you're able to detach yourself from desire and all of those things. So to higher spiritual states. Now, what does classical music do? The very basis of classical music, first of all, the fact that it's so emotive. So what it does is it makes you not only emotionally more aware, it makes it cathartic for you emotionally. So if there is a trapped emotion, there are two types of ways your emotions can be transcended. One is through catharsis, and the other is through transformation. This is experiential and empirical truth again. No? Catharsis mein kya hota hai? When you are feeling sorrowful or sad, for example, you hear something that is also sad and poignant. And in that identification, you cry. And in that crying, there is a release. So that is catharsis. The second thing is when you're feeling sad, for example, and you hear something which is transformative, something which is extremely opposite to what you're hearing, and your sadness gets transformed to happiness. So that is transformative. So these are the typical two ways in which music allows your emotions to find release and get released from the exclusive internal experience, isolated experience of feeling those emotions, into connecting with something outside of yourself. And in that connecting outside of yourself is where the therapeutic potential lies. So that is one of the biggest things. So when you're no longer trapped emotionally, you're less inclined to be at the mercy of those emotions. So aren't you more present and more freed up if your emotions are not dragging you down? So that is one. Two is, like I said, the centering feature of sa, shadaj in classical music, which is whatever rag you sing, you come back to sa. It is like a symbolic spiritual center point, which is what we all do when we do our meditation, right? When we are trying to, all of these trappings of emotions and dynamics and anger and frustration, we are trying to come to a spiritual center of me and the present, which is symbolized powerfully in coming back to sa when you go to different ragas and come back. This is one among many things that we can keep speaking about in terms of spiritual connection of music with Indian classical music with spirituality. I mean, this is a topic for hours together, but just to give you so the way to practically access it, just begin with engaging in classical music, and please also be on a spiritual path of self-discovery and meditation, and you will automatically start to see both of them have a symbiotic role to play with each other. And hopefully we will have a lot more to discuss. I hope I've answered your question.
This is a question about what you talked about, popularizing this music and so on and so forth. I mean, that's not a bad idea at all. And in fact, Sangam Talks lecture itself is doing that to some extent. But the question is, we have seen in the case of things like yoga and Vedanta, that, unless you have that elite backbone, too much of this popularization can lead to, losing ownership completely.
Can you explain that?
The point is that, I mean, any honest person would say that I got this from somebody, right? That's called citation in academic circles. And in the case of yoga, Vedanta, and so on and so forth, an active effort is made to dissociate these forms from the roots. And the same thing could well happen to classical music. It would get appropriated to anybody who wants to appropriate it, and it will lose its roots, which is what we are really concerned with, because we have seen this happen with Advaita Vedanta as well as with yoga. So, for instance, yoga also got recently banned, and then you said, and then Alabama legislature said that you can't use namaste. That's a forbidden word. I mean, when things come from this polytheistic tradition, there is always an element of appropriation, and then what I would only call avarana, which is masking the source, so that it doesn't stay polytheist. So what are your thoughts about this? I'm not against popularization.
Okay, so there's a difference between calling it popularization and making it relevant to the human condition. There are two different things. So popularizing is what fusion music possibly does, what Bollywood culture possibly does. But when you're trying to expand the relevance of something deeply spiritual, when we talk about spirituality, we are talking about the human condition and about the angst of being human. Now, if our traditional music can actually be relevant, you don't need to popularize it. So one of the things that I very strongly believe in whatever practice that I do, I'm talking about my approach, is that I don't want to dilute Indian classical music in its original form. Ragas will remain ragas, and the way it is practiced will remain the way it's practiced. It is only setting it in a context that is relevant to you. The source is not diffused. The source is not, let's say, it is not watered down. It is still very much holding its essence, but it is important for it to be accessible. So you put it in a context which is accessible rather than diluting the integrity of the original source of music. So, like for example, what you're saying is popularizing, which is basically tweaking the original form of music to make it more accessible. So, which is probably what fusion music possibly does. There is no judgment on whether that's right or wrong. That is a personal call that particular artist takes. But my approach is to not dilute classical music, but instead get people to see how relevant it can be in its original form, except that it is placed in context that, see, what has traditionally happened so far is that classical music has been kept in a slightly inaccessible space. Only people who learn classical music can perform it. Only people who know ragas can actually consume it. Only people who who have years of training or years of exposure can enjoy or take the spiritual benefits it has to offer. That is what we are trying to break, and by making it more relevant in a subjective context. Now, in terms of the original content, it's, at least in my scheme of things, if it is diluted, it is not going to have that impact that you want, which is a spiritual potential it has is available only if the integrity is kept to its original form, not when it's diluted. So this question doesn't arise at all, because this would arise only if there is a dilution of the integrity of the original content. I hope that answers your question.